Okay, so this this particular parsha class is maybe on some of the most difficult parshiot to do a parsha class on. The parshiot of Vayakel and Pekudei. Vayakel and Pekudei are really sort of a checklist. They are a checklist of accomplishments of the Mishkan itself, that which happened um, in the when Moshe instructed in the Parshiot of Truma and the Parsha of Tetzaveh and the Parsha of Kitisa, all of those Parshiot, all the different vessels of the of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, the all the various clothing of Aaron and his children, etc. All of that sort of comes to fruition, and it sort of tells us what has been done, as opposed to being new material on its own. And so, what I decided to do was actually really deal with the concept of the mikdash um, as as sort of a larger question, which is okay, you know, what is this thing? What space does it occupy? Why am I interested in it? Why does the Torah dedicate so much time to it? And ultimately, the question that I put here is when I said the heavens of the heavens cannot contain you, that actually is not a random statement. This actually is a direct quote from Shlomo HaMelech, from King Solomon, in the book of Kings. Ki umnam yoshev Elohim al haaretz. Does God really dwell on the land? Somebody doesn't have their mute worked out. Hold on a second. Um, okay, okay. So the question that is asked, let me go back to the Hebrew. Kamnom Yoshev Elohim al haaretz. Does God really dwell in the land? Hinei hashamayim u'shmei shemaim lo yichalchucha. The heavens and the heavens of the heavens cannot contain you. Av ki habayit hazeh asher baniti. Even this house which I, Solomon, have built. This is a sort of a classic Jewish problem. Classic in the sense that Judaism, we say in the Yigdal, Ein lo guf, ein lo dumut guf. God now has not a body nor even the semblance of a body, right? When the Rambam will go to great lengths to tell us that God does not have a hand, and when the Torah says that God took us out of Egypt, biyad chazakav yisro netuyah, that is merely a figurative statement. And so, the idea of building a house for God is something which sort of stretches credulity. This is the official translation, but will God really dwell on the earth? Even the heavens to their uttermost reaches cannot contain you. How much less the house that I have built? So essentially, King Solomon, after having invested a tremendous amount in the building of the Beit HaMikdash, which was a very grand building, certainly in his day, required, by the way, international trade. He had to get the cedars of Lebanon from Tyre. And so he says, even as great as this house is, it's not going to contain God. So then what is this about? Um, Now, I want to maybe make a very aggressive statement here. And that is, in these parshiot, we learn about the Mishkan. We learn about the tabernacle. So I'm going to throw this out. What is the difference between the temple and the tabernacle? Okay. No one.
The
Well,
tabernacle is a
the
moving
show on the
structure.
road.
Okay, well, it's Ruthie. First.
The tabernacle is a moving sanctuary
Okay,
and not
tabernacle moving sanctuary. Okay, so what they say is, how do you know you're a redneck? If your wealthiest relative just bought a new house and it has wheels, right? That's the joke. So this is what Ruthie just described. My wealthy relatives, they live in a house. It has a foundation. My not so wealthy relatives, they live in a house that has wheels. So that's maybe the difference between the Mishkan and the Mikdash, right? I'm gonna try and push this one a little bit further, but we'll see. We'll see if I'm correct. I just have a thought here on that. Um, but the Mishkan was was commanded to the Jewish people in the desert. Vasuni mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in them. right? And that even though it uses the word mikdash, it refers to the Mishkan. We will pontificate on the difference between those two words in a few slides, but I want to just say that there is it is a little difficult to find a direct command to build the Beit HaMikdash. And even Jerusalem is not identified as such in the five books of Moses, right? In the Torah Moshe, we do not have an indication that says, okay, listen, you Jewish people wandering in the desert, there's this holiday in at Har Sinai, and the and at on Har Sinai, I'm going to tell you that really from the days of the Akedah, from the days of the binding of Isaac, I have decided that there's going to be my temple is going to be on this mountain called Moriah in Jerusalem. No such directive exists in the instructions about Mikdash or Mishkan. And just to sort of show you how open the idea is, right? And it will be the place that will be chosen, right? This is not a place that has been chosen. It says that will be chosen. This is a as yet unidentified place. Hashem Elokeichem l'shachen shemosham, to cause His name to dwell there, right? So that's interesting that we use God's name and not God's essence, which is a theologically an easier term to deal with. That's where you're going to bring your sacrifices. That's where you're going to give your tithes, and the gifts of truma, right? And all of the various offerings you give to God. So there'll be a place that you're going to have to choose. This, by the way, is all in the book of Dvarim. I think this is in the 12th chapter of the book of Dvarim. And it says, Kim el makom asher yivchar Hashem Elokeichem, mikol shiftechem nashun shmo sham, l'shichnot shidushu sham. You will look only to the site that your God Hashem will choose amidst your tribes as God's habitation to establish the divine name there. There you are to go. So here we are finding that Mishkan, the Mikdash, is not identified as a place per se, but is as a place that this is a save the date in a way. And it's not the invitation, it's a save the date. Except instead of date, you have to put place. That there is going to be a holy place, there is going to be a center, but it's just undesignated. Now, I believe that God could have designated it. God could have said it's going to be Yerushalayim. God could have easily identified such a thing. He certainly identifies a land. So why not to be more specific about a place within that land? That certainly could happen. So let's try and sort of see if we can unpack this a little bit further.
Rabbi, but before you move away, could you show us on that slide what part of the old city of Jerusalem exists still today, like the Kotel?
Okay.
Is the Kotel there somewhere?
Yeah. Okay. So here, why don't I? This little area here might be. Itai might be able to say a little better, but I would say this is the Shar HaAshbot, I believe.
The dung gate.
The dung gate. This is the parking lot near the Kotel. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Over here might be the Kotel. Right? And this area over here is where the temple would be, is the temple courtyard. Just to note, the temple courtyard was expanded, right? All those big ashland stones that Herod puts in his temple extend the size of the Temple Mount. So Herod's Temple Mount is much larger than Shlomo's.
So anything that we see today, like in antiquity in the old city, it's from the second temple. Nothing really from the first temple, I gather.
Okay, so let's be more specific about that. So in the old city itself, it's going to be probably most of the stuff that you're actually seeing is well past Second Temple. You have to dig down very far to get to Second Temple. If you see the stones with that distinctive border, the sort of Herodian stones, those I think are Second Temple. And by the way, I'm no archaeological expert, so don't take this is what I know from, going on the tours and reading some of the books and, just some background knowledge. But as you go down, when you go to the tunnel tours in the old city, the tunnel tours will take you down various strata levels until you get to the Roman street. That's the very bottom level.
Right.
But many levels on top of that. Now, that's number one. Number two is when you go out of this parking lot through the gate, there's a whole complex, which is the sort of the city of David. That's the real tunnel tours. And I imagine that this little structure here is meant to be the Gihon Spring. So there's a whole sort of system of tunnels you can walk. You can walk through Chizkiyahu's tunnel. So all of that's going to be First Temple. There are excavations there as well. It's a special ticket that you get. And as well, over here, there is an archaeological park, which is Second Temple. So you need a little bit of guidance there, that's for sure.
Right, right. Yeah.
Is this the Davidson area by the one that you just drew and just
Yeah.
the Davidson Arch or whatever it's called, yeah.
Right. And for you Canadians, he owns the Tampa Bay Lightning, I think. Anyway.
What?
There's a hockey temple connection. I feel as a Canadian, I have to mention that. The Davidson family that sponsored that also owns the Tampa Bay Lightning. Could be wrong. Okay.
Who knew?
Yeah, fair. All right. Moving on. Now, we talked about the fact that the Mikdash, there's no clear instruction in the Torah to build a Mikdash. The Rambam in the Sefer HaMitzvot says, Mitzvah Hashem, Mitzvah Chaf, the 20th mitzvah. He should tzivanu livnot Beit HaBechira. There's a mitzvah to build. Beit HaBechira is an interesting term. It means the chosen house, but it's another word for the Mikdash, for the temple. Bo yeh ha'akrava v'ha'arat ha'esh tamid. Right there, you're going to have the sacrifices. You're going to have the eternal flame. Ve'elav tieh ha'alicha v'ha'aliyah l'regel. That's where you're going to go and gather for the pilgrimage festivals. V'kibutz b'chol shana v'hu amru yitalev v'asu li mikdash. So the Rambam is going to attach to this the verse v'asu li mikdash shachanti b'tocham. Right? Now, it is clear that verse is a verse that comes in the middle of the building of the Mishkan. That is a verse that is given in the desert, and Moshe is told to build. And after that, there's all sorts of portable objects that are being built. So the Rambam's identification of the mitzvah of the Mikdash is really at least the Mishkan. Now, interestingly, the Rambam in his Hilchot, in his code, in the laws of kings, says Shalosh mitzvot nitztavu Yisrael b'shat knisatan la'aretz. There are 3 mitzvot that the Jewish people will have when they enter into the land of Israel. Number 1 is limnot lahem melech. They have to appoint a king. The second is lahachrit zaro shel Amalek, to eliminate the forces of Amalek. You could interpret that figuratively, to eliminate anarchy. And the third, livnot Beit HaBechira, and to build the Beit HaMikdash. Now, what's interesting is that the Rambam finds the pasuk l'shichno tidreshu uvata shama. That is the verse that we saw in the last slide. L'shichno tidreshu, that you will choose God's. You shall go to find God's presence, right? And what's interesting about this verse is Rashi is going to tell us that verse is about Shiloh. Now here I have shown you a picture of this is the Beit Knesset in the current Israeli city of Shiloh. I happen to know the architect mostly because he's a big fan of Chazanut, and he lived in Alon Shvut. And as such a fan, he was always interested in meeting Yasla Rosenblatt's descendants. Anyway, he designed this. He designed it to look like the Mishkan. And so Shiloh, if you when you start the book of Samuel, you'll see that that's where the Mishkan is. It is not in Jerusalem. It is not in the near the tribe of Judah. It is in the tribe of Ephraim, and it is in a city called Shiloh. Just to give you another geographic marker, Rabbi Avi Berman um, studied in the Yeshivat Hesder in Shiloh. So this is where the Mikdash is. This is where I should say not where the Mikdash is. This is where the Mishkan is. Now, the point I'm making here, I'm making a bit of an aggressive point, but one of the things that you're seeing is that the Mishkan, the command of the Mikdash, as Rambam understands it, is not per se to Solomon's temple. It doesn't say anything about building a permanent building. It simply says that you need to have a fixed place for this. And there were several places where that Mishkan stood through the movements of the children of Israel. It was in Gilgal for many years. It was in Nov. It was in Givon, and it was in Shiloh. And then after the Plishtim captured the Aron HaKodesh, and Shiloh fell because of the corruption of the sons of the Kohen Gadol. So that's when David ultimately brings the Aron HaKodesh back to Yerushalayim. And from there, David says, how can I live in a house of cedar while this is in a tent? But that transition is, in a sense, it is David's initiative, and there may be divrei neviim, there may be prophets who said, okay, let's do this, let's make this change. But what we don't have is a clear verse from the Torah. Now, I think this ends up being something which is very interesting. We'll try and move that further. But first, Annie has a question.
Yeah. So where is the tzivui to appoint a king? We know how much.
Book of Devarim. Book of Devarim. Som tasim alecha melech mikerav achecha.
So why was all the struggle with the prophecy of Shmuel when he was trying to convince the people not to appoint a king?
Okay, excellent question. It's you can save that question for when we do our Parshat class on Parshat Shoftim, because there will be its place. It's an interesting question about it's a debate. Is the melech necessary? Because it says when you ask for a king like all of the other people around you, a king is a complicated piece, and it's not clear if it's even the most desirous version.
We sing a whole haftarah about it.
Because they were running with the Shoftim, they ran quite well.
I don't know which book of Shoftim you were reading. Maybe with some of the Shoftim,
there were many Shoftim, but it was okay. Was it required a king? They wanted to be like the rest of the nation. That's what they wanted a king.
Annie, we're way off topic, but I'm just going to say this: you can't tell me it ran quite well after you read. I think it's chapter 19, 20, the story of Pilegesh Begiva.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Forget what I just said. Yeah. לא ניכנס לזה.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. Score one for the rabbi. Okay.
Yeah, easily.
Now, this is an interesting discussion in the tractate of Shavuot. The tractate of Shavuot is trying to figure out which is which. Bishlama. So it says, according to you, Mikdash Ikri Mishkan. The Mikdash is really called a Mishkan, Dichtiv, because the verse says, V'natati Mishkani betochachem. I put my Mishkan amidst you. And the Mishkan the Ikri Mikdash Minolon. How do I know that the Mishkan, right? I'm assuming that means that tenty structure, the tabernacle, is really called a Mikdash. Ilema, maybe you want to say Midichtiv Vinasu HaKahatim Noseh HaMikdash, and the Kahatim, the tribe of Kahati, they carried the Mikdash. So the Talmud's going to answer, Hahu be'aron Ketiv. You can't tell me that. That is referring to the Aron HaKodesh. When there it says that the Katim are going to carry the Mikdash, that's going to refer to the Ark of the Covenant itself. And so you can't tell me that that's what it means that they carried the Mikdash. Ela mehacha. No, rather we're going to learn it from this verse. Vasuli Mikdash v'shachanti bitocham. right? How do I know that the Mishkan was also called a Mikdash? It means because the verse says, "Make for me a Mikdash, and I will dwell within them," and that referred to the tent. The tent. Uktiv kol asher mani otcha et tavnit Mishkan, and then later on it says, "All of them I'm going to show you, Moshe, the building plans of the Mishkan, the pattern, as they say, of the Mishkan." So here, you might take the lesson that the Mishkan is the Mikdash. But the Mishkan, and here's where I think it gets very interesting. When you look at the vessels of the Mishkan, right? So this is the ark, and this is on the right is the Lechem HaPanim. And these are obviously modern recreations. The one on the left is from Chabad. I forget who did this one on the right. But these are different renditions based on the biblical descriptions and some of the Talmudic interpretation and medieval Rishonim who interpret that. But there's one thing that you'll notice about both of these. They both have poles for carrying. Now, the Arona Kodesh, you were not allowed to remove the poles. The poles were always part of it. But the poles of the table could be removed. Now, what I think is very interesting is this is called the Mizbeach HaOlah, or the Mizbeach HaNechoshet. This is the exterior one, right? And so it says, "Va'asita badim lamizbech badei atzi shitim v'tzipita otam nechoshet." And you shall make poles for the altar, poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with copper. So even that exterior mizbeach had a set of poles, right? And this is a rendition. This is Chabad's rendition of the Mizbeach HaKetoret, the altar of the incense altar. And then I just, for the sake of expansion, this is a rendition of the various poles and structures of the tent itself. But you can see that everything is designed with a sense of portability, and all of this, to a certain extent, was nafal li asimon, a little, as they say, a coin dropped on me, or the token dropped in the phone, because and this is a plug for his Chug Torah Eretz Yisrael after davening. Itai Kaliski was talked about the various faiths, or maybe the cults of the ancient world, and so everything was conceived of as entirely geographical. That that Amon Ra was in charge of Egypt, and Marduk was in charge of Mesopotamia, and Baal was in charge of Israel, and maybe Asherah was Lebanon, etc. And each place had their own deity. And when you moved places, you took on the new gods of the new place. And as what he suggested as proof of this was the fact that the Samaritans, who are also known as the Kutim, because they came from the Mesopotamian city of Kuta, they adopt Judaism because they come to Shomron. They're called Samaritans because they live in the Shomron, but they adopt Jewish faith, and it's perhaps a controversial adoption, and that's a whole other story unto itself. But the idea that you have a faith that is not tied to geography is a central idea of Judaism. How is that best expressed? Maybe that's best expressed by a temple that has no fixed geography. That the idea that the Torah does not tell you this is going to be your holy place. It does not put a pin in the map. It does not say here and only here. And that the Mishkan the Torah was given in the desert, right? The Torah is given in literally nowhere, right? Sinai is literally nowhere. And it's interesting, Sinai does not hold any sacred value for the Jewish people anymore. And you find that the Mishkan moves with Bnei Israel. It moves with the children of Israel. And the holiness, to a certain extent, is because the children of Israel bring it there. And who are the only people who can undo the holiness of the Mikdash? As we'll learn through the books of Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, and Yechezkel, the Jewish people are the ones who can defy it. Right? It is otherwise, to a certain extent, invincible, but for the impurity of the Jewish people. And the idea that all of these vessels are built with a certain portability to them is I think not accidental. You could always make the argument, oh yeah, of course, these they were in the desert for 40 years. They had to move around. So of course you built, before there's a description of all these poles and different things. You needed that, right? But I think the prominence that the poles are given in the description, especially of the ark itself, because in the ark you weren't allowed to remove the poles, and we're going to see in the next slide just a little bit more prominence given to a couple of the different vessels of the Mikdash, but we shouldn't see these as ancillary. So, like when I made the joke before, when your richest relative buys a new home and it has wheels, that means you're a redneck. Yeah, so okay, maybe that says something about a sociological piece, but this is, I think, fundamentally different. The idea of the portability of it is the message. The form is the content. Because in what we're trying to say is, no, the heavens do not contain, even the heavens cannot contain God. So certainly not this house. But the idea that it moves and that it is about how if you will, the Jewish people make what we like to call a dir batachtonim, a place for God underneath, this is the Lubavitch Rebbe's term for it, place for God in our world, to bring the kedusha back in. But that's the idea, is that it requires the people to do that. I should also just mention here that this is a multidimensional concept, because there's a very insightful book written by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. It's called The Sabbath and Its Meaning for Modern Man. And in this book, Heschel essentially says that the Mikdash is a sanctuary in space, and Shabbat is a sanctuary in time. And at the beginning of Parshat Vayakhel, it teaches us about the sanctuary in space, in time, right? It's going to tell us about Shabbat. And it's going to tell us, Lo tevaru eish b'chomosh votechem b'yom Shabbat. You shall not kindle a fire in any of your locations on Shabbat. And it's from here that the rabbis derive that what is forbidden on Shabbat are the activities that are necessary to build the Mishkan. And so you get this idea that you have this sanctuary in time, which is in a certain way the complement to the sanctuary in space. And so the Shabbat ultimately becomes this Jewish sanctuary. Even in the absence of a Mikdash, we end up with this sanctuary that the Jews have taken everywhere around the world, and is a very unique feature of Jewish life and Jewish spirituality. And certainly Jewish thinkers have thought about it in terms of connection to things which are transcendental. I mean, if we read the Sfas Emes and the way he talks about Shabbat, he talks about it as you sort of almost transport yourself to the world of the divine, and you escape the physical. And so it's similar to the Mikdash in the sense that the Mikdash, of course, is not going to contain the divine, but it is going to represent that connection. Similarly, I think the Shabbat does the same activity on a time basis that the Mikdash tries to do on a space basis. But the idea, again, I think, is that the structure is meant to say, of course, we're not containing God in this, right? And of course, this is not, we're not making God geographical. The idea is to transcend that sense of geography. Now,
So
this
how
is
did he expand into a Bet HaMikdash in a specific place?
what? Oh, I think it. Oh, so I think so here's my analogy. So I learned this from Tzur Somerville. Those of you who know Tzur Somerville, um, he's a professor of economics at the UBC Sauder Business School. And he said to me, you for much less money, you can create equally as efficient transit on a bus route that you can with a subway. And everybody's worried about traffic jams, but the truth of the matter is that you can create dedicated bus lanes. You can say that cars are not allowed in them. You can arrange your traffic lights, and you can keep things moving, right? And he says, why do people put subways in? Because in order to get the developers to invest in the infrastructure around the subway, you need to build something physical in that can't be changed as easily as a bus route. And then people will build density around your hubs. So that would be, in a way, my answer is that in order for Jerusalem to really become the center of the Jewish people, in order for it to take on its full majesty, you need to build a building or two there. I mean, here, I'll say it even. Um, we were conquered in Jerusalem 2000. Well, let's just make it 2,000 years ago. It's a little less, right? Almost 2,000 years ago, right? The Romans destroyed the temple and it hasn't been rebuilt since. But much of that temple complex is still there. And even so, there are lots of people who claim, it's not ours, that we're interlopers, but they all know that they're working against something very, very important. The grandeur of that building and of that building complex is an anchor that cements the Jewish people's presence in the land of Israel in ways that very few other things do. We can talk up, down, and sideways about our David HaMelech and Beit Lechem, right? But in the end of the day, I think that temple in Jerusalem makes Jerusalem a whole different story. Um, so I don't know. I think that's a good answer, but you can choose for yourself on that. Okay. Now, this chart here, which is a little bit too small to see, and I had no really good way to incorporate it, but there's an article by Rabbi Shlomo Levi who analyzes the various poles in the different structures. So if you notice, and he highlights this in red, that in many of the in the various descriptions, the the poles of the poles of the ark are always prominent at every stage, at inception, at um, at the building, at the delivery, at the accounting in the end. They're always mentioned. But not quite as prominent, but similarly prominent, are the poles as mentioned in the Mizbeach HaOlah, the outer altar. His argument is sort of an interesting one, which I think holds water, is that the Aron represents Torah, and the Mizbeach HaOlah, the sacrificial altar, that represents tefillah. And those two things are things which accompany the Jewish people wherever they might go. And they have a special they hold a special place. And Jews, we play we pray everywhere. The irony is now we pray everywhere except for the Temple Mount, because currently under current Israeli, I'm not sure if it's enshrined in law, but certainly it's enshrined in practice that Jews are not meant to pray on the Temple Mount at the moment. But leaving that aside, we can pray anywhere, right? You can pray in a boat in the middle of the Pacific. You can pray in Hawaii. You can pray in Alaska. You can pray in South Africa. You can pray in Zimbabwe, right? You can pray anywhere. And so these things move around with the Jewish people. Now, I just picked this up this morning. In the morning Zoom, we were doing this story of this article by Yoel Bin-Nun about why God does not appear in the Megillah, and he points out to something I thought was very, very interesting. He says that the description of the capital in Shushan is very much parallel to the Beit HaMikdash. When you look at the Beit HaMikdash, especially the one of Yechezkel, you'll see there's an inner and an outer courtyard. If you look at the description of Achashverosh's palace, there's an inner and outer courtyard, right? Esther is people are not allowed to go in to visit the king without an invitation. Similarly, in the Mikdash, you cannot go in. The only person who can go in is the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur goes in twice to the Holy of Holies. In the book of Esther, Esther goes in twice to see Achashverosh. The interesting thing is the contrast. When the Kohen Gadol goes into the Holy of Holies, he is wearing simple clothes of white, right? Humility before the King of Kings. When Esther goes in to see Achashverosh, she is wearing Bigdei Malchut, right? The Megillah says Vatilbash Esther Malchut, and Esther wore majesty. And the idea here is that she goes in to seduce the king, and Aaron goes in to be humble before the king. The one other thing which is very interesting about that is the word that Esther says after fasting to go in to see Achashverosh, right? Is and that's another interesting thing. Yobino doesn't even mention that she's fasting, right? What is the Kohen Gadol doing when he goes into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur? He's also fasting, right? So here we have again these parallels between these two. Now Yol Binun says, just going back, the word that is used when Esther is to go into Achashverosh is uvechein avo ala melech, and as such I will go to the king. We use that word in the Kedusha on the high holidays, again, as a reference to Esther, but sort of that we use that cognitive kind of sense that, okay, we are now approaching the king. But Yobi Nun says that this parallelism was about the fact that this was about, for the Jews, a dangerous replacement of Achashverosh as the authority, as opposed to their king of kings. And here, maybe it's worthwhile to just go to Yechezkel, the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is very clear on this very challenging concept, and the concept is that when there's a destruction of the temple, Ezekiel is going to see this vision of the chariot that is leaving is being exiled. The book of Yechezkel begins with this story of the chariot, and it sort of represents the sort of the divine presence leaving the holy of holies, or at least the Temple Mount, and it is a way of Yechezkel representing spiritually the destruction of the temple. Now, at the very same time, Yechezkel is going to be talking about the birth of this idea called Mikdash Ma'at, which is really the proto scenario of the modern synagogue, right? Because we can now have God in this Mikdash Ma'at. And just to show you how this gets understood by the rabbis, this is from the Eicha Rabbah. So the Eicha Rabbah is interested in giving you more detail on the process of the destruction and the exile, if you will, of God's presence from the land of Israel. So it says the divine presence undertook 10 journeys from keruv to keruv, right, from angel to angel, from the two angels atop of the ark, from keruv to the threshold of the house, from the threshold of the house to the keruvim, from the keruvim to the eastern gate, from the eastern gate to the courtyard, from the courtyard to the roof, from the roof to the altar, from the altar to the wall, from the wall to the city, from the city to the Mount of Olives, right? So it takes you out, sort of takes you through a path out of the Beit HaMikdash, and you're getting the sense of the divine presence moving. But here, it's not God himself. And this is something which gets Jews into a very interesting little trouble. So if you'll see occasionally before a mitzvah, one of the most prominent of which is Sfirat Omer. It says L'shem yichud kudsha brichu ushchinte, for the purpose of uniting God and the Shekhinah. So this this is a Kabbalistic invocation, because the general idea is when the Jews were exiled from the land of Israel, the Shekhinah, God's presence, was exiled. Now, this gets into a lot of Kabbalism, which I'm not fully competent on, but I can tell you that there are different parts of God. So, Kudsha Brichu might be Malchut, and Tiferet might be, God's Shekhinah. I forget which one of the Sefirot corresponds to what, but the idea is that they are separated, and the Jew is meant to reunite them. The Noda B'Yehuda thought this was absolutely scandalous to recite, and he told people, get this out of the Siddur. Do not say that. Do not say any such thing. We don't ever say L'Shem Yichud Kudsha Brichu Ushchinte. So there's a lot of debate about that particular invocation. I mention it basically to say to you that there is this sense that I think sits deep in Torah, that Shechina, if you will, which sometimes is also synonymous with Knesset Israel, with the Jewish people, certainly in the Kabbalistic language. This is one of those things that symbolizes the fact that God's presence, in a sense, moves, and it moves with the children of Israel. And the idea is that God does not attach to geography, but connection to God attaches to the Jewish people. And I think that's the argument that I just basically want to make with this whole piece, is that God does not tell us, the house does not contain God. He does not tell us where it's going to be. There is such an aversion, if you will, to fixed geography throughout all of this, especially, we look at the poles, the idea that this whole picture is allergic to a specific geography. And we sort of see that idea be very consistent throughout various different parts of the Tanakh. So that's, I guess, this week, Vayakel Pekudei.